Hi everybody, my name is Chris Collison. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the three research projects that are currently going on in my lab. So let's go straight away and take a look. So those three projects are organic photovoltaics design and development, three-dimensional microstructure composites for superhydrophobicity, and photomechanical effects in liquid crystal polymers. And one thing I'm going to point out is there's a QR code on each of the slides in this presentation. You can use your phone to contact me through that QR code using your camera. We'll start first with organic photovoltaics. So my group makes devices from start to finish. Here's a cartoon of the devices that we make. We also work with these squarane materials that Dr. Cody makes in his lab. And what we typically want to happen is we want these squarane molecules to pack in a certain way, and when that happens, we can change the optical properties, we can change the absorbance properties of the device, and this helps with our challenge to increase the efficiency of those devices. So, as I've pointed out, when we change the packing of these molecules, perhaps by changing the side groups of the molecules, then we can change the spectroscopy, as is shown in this particular image. We see this very broad red curve in here across the whole solar spectrum, and that means we can absorb more light. What also happens is, as we increase the crystal packing, what we can do is increase the mobility of charges through the device. Everything that leads to higher efficiency means that we have a better chance of commercializing these devices. So high efficiency, simple molecules synthesized by Dr. Cody, and we have a pathway to commercialization that in my group we're spending more time on. I'm now going to move on to the second avenue of research based on superhydrophobicity. Every time we change the properties of the surface for a particular material, independent of what that material is, we can affect how water, for example, balls up on top of that surface, as you can see here in this second diagram. Here's an example of some surfaces that we've made in our lab. Here's an example of some of these surfaces that we've made using photolithography processes, and we're using a scanning electron microscope here to show this particular surface topography. We also work with different polymer materials, and we get those to precipitate out of solution in order to form these surfaces. And what happens is, as we wear down the surface, because we have a three-dimensional microstructure, we have these long life surfaces that are very useful for antibacterial and self-cleaning applications. Again, we have a QR code here if you're interested. The third project I'm going to talk about is a very new project for us, photomechanical effects in liquid crystal polymers. And what we do in this case is we have a methacrylate polymerization that I'm showing down at the bottom here. So as we polymerize across this methacrylate group, we form these polymer chains here, as represented by N here, which typifies the polymer that sits inside of this bracket system here. Of course, we'd expect a similar polymer chain to exist throughout the material, but we can cross-link these materials. So notice there are these methacrylate groups in here, and we can polymerize across these groups. And what we can do is build these liquid crystals into the cross-linkers, along with something called azobenzene. When we shine light on the azobenzene, it moves from a trans state to a cis state, and that allows us to mechanically deform the plastic. It allows us to align certain perhaps squarane molecules to influence the spectroscopy of those materials and influence how well our solar cells work. So these materials have actually been used already for light-triggered swimming nanorobots. We intend to use it for aggregate alignment and other applications. So this is very new work for us. So let's explore this idea a little further and circle back around to photovoltaics and photophysics. As I pointed out earlier, the efficiency of organic photovoltaic devices depends on the packing, the morphology of these dyes. And as you can see in these spectra of a variety of different squaranes that are made in Dr. Cody's group, what we can find is that the black curves here are the solution spectra. But when we put these squarane materials into a film, then we see a broadening of the spectrum. And that broadening allows us to absorb more sunlight, and as I've mentioned before, it improves the mobility, the conductivity of the materials, and it also increases the energy transfer. So absorbance spectrum, charge mobility, exciton diffusion. So can we control this packing independent of the side groups in here that Dr. Cody changes? And the answer is yes, we can. And again, what we're doing here is we're using these methyl methacrylate or these methyl acrylate monomers, and we're building off of them these cross linkers. So we start with the methyl acrylate materials in here, and then we have talked already about liquid crystal cross linkers that allow us to align these polymers in a form of network. We can also add the squarane to the crosslinker. We can add several squarenes to the crosslinker. And we can also add the diazobenzene diacrylate in here that allows us to disrupt the backbone of the polymer, that allows us to disrupt the packing of the squarenes in these liquid crystal polymer networks. So we can control aggregation at first with concentration and also with squarane placement. So in this top three diagrams, what we're seeing is that with the liquid crystal in place, with a large concentration of liquid crystal, then we can separate the squarane materials quite substantially, and we can gradually bring them together as we increase that concentration of squarane crosslinkers. This allows us to see the impact of that separation distance. We should expect to see a change in the spectroscopy and a change in the mobility and a change in the energy transfer as we run through this particular experiment. We can also put squarenes in different positions on the crosslinker in here, and we can start to look at how the spectroscopy changes as we change this slip stack angle in here. We can also add when we add second squarenes to the crosslinker, then we can force these materials to pack in a certain way. We can also explore self-assembly. It may be that the squarenes want to pack on top of each other, and this would be a very distinct and different spectroscopy signal that we'd see in F here compared with D over on the left-hand side. The other thing that we can do, of course, as a control is we can add azobenzene, and when we shine a certain amount of ultraviolet light at these azobenzene crosslinkers, what happens is we go from a trans state to a cis state, and therefore we end up disrupting that nice stacking of the squarenes, and so we can explore what happens to the spectroscopy and just make sure that the spectral changes that we're seeing in the first case are actually due to these squarenes packing on top of each other. And so we should be able to make that change by modifying the azobenzene within the backbone. So, of course, I've talked already about why organic photovoltaics must be efficient. They must be efficient in order to have some commercialization success. But we also must remember the value of organic photovoltaics. They have various environmental advantages. They have a short energy payback time. So once they've been in use for 6 months, then the costs to the environment of building them in the first place have been wiped out. Speaking of cost, in principle, they can be made in a low-cost way by printing them on flexible substrates, and that allows us to actually do sort of stained glass windows that you could use in building integration. And these are some of the squarane or some of the devices that we've made in our lab over the years. So different colors, semi-transparent or transparent for smart windows and for building integration. Lots of fantastic opportunity for these devices in the future, which takes me back to the final part of my talk, which is really in the importance of going from lab to fab. Again, our strategy moving forward is to move from lab to fab, from laboratory to fabrication to commercialization. there's a growing space that exists between the work that's done in the university and the products that everyone ends up touching every day. And so we want to bridge that gap with the research that we do and stretch the work that comes out of our research group and transitions that towards a commercial product. So if you're interested, contact me. Here's the QR code. And finally, a few things about me. I play and coach soccer. Here's my son, Luke. This is on a team a couple of years ago that I coached. Second, I climb mountains. Personal growth is a mountain that I climb. I aspire professionally. I was chair of academic senate at RIT for a couple of years, and you see some images here of me in that role. I also practice and read a lot about Buddhism. I combine it with quantum mechanics. There's a huge overlap there. And I'm also interested in how this all ties in with the future of our planet and climate change. So we can always talk about that if you are interested. I also actually climb actual mountains. I'm a 46er. I've climbed all 46 peaks in the Adirondack mountain range. Completed that in 2020. Lastly, let me just talk back about science again a little bit. My group has made significant progress in the last couple of years with 4 papers published in that time. And we are continuing along that road in the research that I've outlined today. Should you join my group, these are the expectations. You're going to develop how to write better scientific communication. You'll be pushed to think critically about your research. I will encourage you to be highly independent and take responsibility for your own success. You would learn thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, structure-function relationships, in particular molecules. You would think a lot about commercialization options, and we'd also use computational chemistry because it makes sense to do so that we don't spend weeks and weeks in the lab when an afternoon on a computer can save us that time. So you'd work with spectroscopy, solar cell manufacture, thermal analysis, and the computational chemistry requiring Gaussian software. You'd benefit by a rich learning environment and high standards of achievement and industry communication. So if you're interested, you have the QR code. You can go back and watch this on YouTube. Thank you for your attention.